Welcome to your favorite channel. What happened after the cameras stopped rolling? After the tears dried, after the promises faded, and after love became a headline instead of a home. Tonight on Viva Flix M, we take you beyond the edits and dramatic reunions of reality TV into a story that feels real, human, and impossible to ignore. For years, fans of 90 Day Fiancé believed they knew the love story of Gino Palazzolo and Jasmine Pina. A relationship full of obsession, arguments, forgiveness, and second chances. But love doesn't end when a relationship ends. Sometimes that's when the real story begins. After the breakup, Gino quietly started a new life. Luxury hotels, calm evenings, and a woman who gave him peace instead of pressure. Her name was Natalie. Then came 4 words that changed everything. I'm pregnant with Gino's child. As wedding bells approach on January 4th, 2026, another heart quietly breaks. Jasmine, once loud, passionate, and fearless, asked a simple question to the man she thought would save her, and his answer shattered her completely. This story isn't just about lost love. It's about timing, truth, and the cruel way life moves forward, whether we are ready or not. Every fairy tale has cracks, and for Gino and Jasmine, they appeared under bright studio lights in front of millions. Their relationship was loud, emotional, unpredictable, and intense. Love came with shouting matches. Apologies came with tears. Forgiveness felt temporary, like a fragile bridge ready to collapse. At first, the chaos seemed like passion. Fans called it real, even true love. But love built on constant conflict eventually runs out of air. Behind the scenes, exhaustion grew. Gino grew tired of defending himself. Jasmine grew tired of feeling insecure. Every argument became heavier than the last. Trust bent and began to break. The breakup didn't come with drama. There was no grand finale, just distance, silence, and the quiet understanding that staying together hurt more than letting go. For Jasmine, the separation felt like abandonment. She had crossed countries, cultures, and comfort zones, believing Gino was forever. Losing that future left a frightening question. Who am I without this love? For Gino, the breakup felt like relief mixed with guilt. He didn't celebrate publicly, didn't endlessly explain. He simply stepped away and searched for calm. That's when Natalie came into Gino's life. No chaos, no screaming, just conversation, understanding, and space to breathe. While Jasmine struggled to process the loss, Gino quietly moved toward a future that would change everything, including his identity as a man, a partner, and soon, a father. At this point, neither of them knew what was coming. The first chapter wasn't about pregnancy, weddings, or betrayal. It was about realizing that love alone isn't always enough to survive reality. Breakups aren't always explosive. Sometimes they arrive softly, like a door closing without a sound. For Gino and Jasmine, the end didn't come with shouting or accusations. It came with exhaustion that settled deep in the chest, where even love feels heavy. Conversations grew shorter. Messages went unanswered. Long emotional talks turned into silence. They shared space, but not direction. Jasmine noticed first. She saw Gino slipping away, not toward another woman, but from the constant tension that had become their life. Every attempt to reconnect felt forced. Every apology felt rehearsed. She faced a terrifying thought. What if he doesn't fight for us anymore? Gino had reached a breaking point. Years of emotional storms had drained him. He wasn't angry or bitter, just done. He stopped arguing because arguing meant caring, and caring had begun to hurt too much. There was no dramatic breakup, no suitcase thrown, no final scream, just a quiet understanding that the relationship had run its course. Jasmine cried deeply, the kind of tears that come from losing part of yourself. Gino stayed quiet, knowing comforting her would reopen wounds neither had the strength to heal together. They hugged briefly, awkwardly, and years of love became memory. For Jasmine, the hardest part wasn't losing Gino. It was losing the future she had imagined. Marriage, stability, a love that proved everyone wrong. For Gino, walking away felt like betrayal, even though staying would have been a lie. Neither knew what the other would become. Jasmine believed she would eventually find love again. Gino believed he would find peace. Neither realized how quickly fate was moving. While Jasmine stood still, rebuilding her heart, Gino was stepping into a new chapter that would change his life forever. Natalie arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, until everything changed. There was no grand introduction, no social media announcement. She appeared when Gino wasn't looking for love, only calm. He had stepped away from chaos, promising himself love would never feel like a battlefield again. Natalie was different. She listened more than she spoke, asked questions without judgment, didn't demand reassurance, and offered understanding. At first, Gino told himself it was just companionship, conversation, and comfort. But comfort can be dangerous. It invites honesty. With Natalie, Gino shared things he never dared to say. His fear of conflict, exhaustion from emotional storms, and desire for a peaceful life. She never judged him, never tried to change him, just accepted him. That acceptance became addictive. They met privately, away from cameras. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners became late-night walks. Before he knew it, Gino was smiling again naturally. For the first time in years, he felt seen without being scrutinized. Natalie didn't rush him. She respected the emotional wounds he carried. That patience made him feel safe in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Gino's story shows how endings can lead to unexpected beginnings, how calm after chaos can bring clarity, and how real love sometimes comes quietly, far from cameras and fanfare. Slowly, a new world opened. A world without shouting, without tears used as weapons, without love that felt conditional. Gino didn't announce this new relationship. He kept it private because he knew real happiness grows best in silence. But this quiet beginning was just the start of something bigger, something irreversible, something that would soon pull his private life back into the public eye. Natalie wasn't just passing through his life. She was becoming part of his future. Luxury didn't always mean excess. For Gino and Natalie, the five-star hotels weren't about showing off. They were places to disappear, to be away from anyone who knew their past, where the noise of former lives couldn't reach them. Behind marble lobbies and soft suites, Gino found something he hadn't felt in years, emotional safety. Mornings were slow, with curtains drawn back to reveal city skylines, coffee shared in quiet. Conversations didn't demand answers. Nights were calm and intentional. No fights, no emotional traps, just presence. For Gino, the contrast was overwhelming. Love had always felt loud, intense, and demanding. With Natalie, it was steady. It didn't test him. It simply existed, and that scared him in a good way. Promises weren't spoken, but they were felt. Natalie never pressured Gino to define the relationship. She didn't ask him to erase his past. She allowed him to heal at his own pace. That patience changed everything. Gino began planning ahead, smiling without anxiety, imagining a future without fear. For the first time, commitment didn't feel like a trap. It felt like peace. Even in those quiet, luxurious moments, Gino wasn't blind to reality. He knew people were watching, that comparisons would be made, and that his past relationship would resurface in public discussion. But inside the hotel walls, none of that mattered. Natalie didn't compete with Jasmine. She didn't rewrite history. She didn't demand justification. She simply built something new, brick by brick, moment by moment. One night, on a balcony overlooking the city, Gino felt it clearly. This wasn't a rebound. It wasn't a distraction. It was transformation. What neither of them knew was that life was already preparing its next move. Soon, 4 words would turn their quiet nights into a headline no one could ignore. Some sentences divide life into before and after. For Gino, that sentence came quietly but hit like thunder. It wasn't said during an argument or a celebration. Natalie looked at him calmly and said, "I'm pregnant." Gino froze. The room felt smaller, louder. He replayed her words, hoping he had misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding. Natalie wasn't dramatic or emotional. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She simply spoke the truth, placing it between them like something fragile and sacred. Gino felt everything at once: shock, fear, joy, responsibility. He had only recently found stability, only recently escaped emotional exhaustion. And now life had handed him something permanent, something that couldn't be paused, edited, or undone, a child. Questions flooded his mind. Am I ready? What will people say? What about my past? What about Jasmine? But Natalie didn't demand answers. She gave him space, knowing real decisions need silence before certainty. That night, Gino barely slept. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about mistakes, growth, the man he used to be, and the man he was becoming. By morning, something inside him shifted. Fear was still there, but beneath it was purpose. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about a future shaped by responsibility, stability, and presence. Natalie watched quietly, afraid to ask, afraid to assume. She knew this moment would define everything, not just their relationship, but their lives. When Gino finally spoke, his voice was calm. We'll face this together. Those words didn't promise perfection. They promised commitment. Unbeknownst to them, this private moment would soon become public. The pregnancy would be confirmed, speculation would follow, and comparisons with the past would be unavoidable. But in that room, none of it mattered. A new chapter had begun, not written by emotion, but by responsibility. Hope is powerful, but in a world full of rumors, headlines, and doubt, it demands proof. For Gino and Natalie, the pregnancy didn't just change their private lives. It pulled them into public scrutiny. Whispers began immediately. Questions followed. Certainty became necessary. The hospital visit wasn't about fear. It was about truth. The waiting room felt colder than it should have. Gino sat quietly, hands folded, staring at nothing. Natalie stayed calm outwardly, but inside, her heart raced. This wasn't about mistrust. It was about confirming reality before rumors grew louder. The DNA test was suggested not from doubt, but responsibility. Gino agreed immediately. The process was clinical and efficient. Paperwork, samples, quiet instructions from staff had no idea the lives they were witnessing shift in real time. Then came the wait. Days passed slowly. Every phone notification made Gino's heart skip. Natalie tried to distract herself, but her mind returned to the same question. Will this change how he sees me? Finally, they returned to the hospital together. The doctor was clear. The results were final. Natalie was carrying Gino Palazzillo's child. There was no celebration in that moment, only relief, a deep, grounding relief that settled into their bones. Gino and Natalie left the hospital quietly. Outside, the city lights seemed brighter, sharper, almost celebratory. But there was no applause, no cheering, just the hum of traffic and the occasional honk in the distance. For them, this wasn't a moment for public acknowledgement. It was a private turning point, a recognition that life would never be the same. It was also a reminder of responsibility, the weight of choices, and the permanence of what was growing inside Natalie. For Gino, the news brought a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, yes, but also fear. He had survived heartbreak, emotional exhaustion, and public scrutiny. He had rebuilt himself quietly, cautiously. And now he was being asked to grow again, to expand into a role he hadn't had time to rehearse. Fatherhood, partnership, and accountability were no longer abstract ideas. They were imminent realities. He understood the stakes fully, not because anyone forced him to, but because he had learned the cost of avoiding truth. Natalie, meanwhile, carried her own thoughts. She had been patient, careful, and supportive. She had entered Gino's life at a time when stability was a distant memory for him. Yet she also knew this pregnancy would change everything. It was a bridge between private happiness and public responsibility. She thought about the future, the quiet mornings, the late-night talks, the laughter of a child, and the new kind of commitment this would require. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about creating a life together and protecting it in a world that already seemed eager to intrude. The first days after the confirmation were gentle. They spoke in whispers, planned in silence, and imagined the routines they wanted. They talked about names, about schools, about birthdays. Each conversation was careful, measured, deliberate. They had both learned the value of patience, and they approached this next chapter with the same deliberate care. But even as they built their private plans, reality was creeping closer. News travels fast. Fans of 90 Day Fiancé, followers of their social media, and those who had watched their drama unfold online would not remain ignorant for long. The first signs appeared subtly. Comments on old photos, private messages, questions about new routines. Gino had anticipated scrutiny, but not the immediate, quiet flood of it. He realized that even the best-kept private moments could be dissected, misinterpreted, and sensationalized. He and Natalie had to prepare for the reality that once the story of the pregnancy reached the public, it wouldn't be theirs alone. It would belong to headlines, to speculation, to judgment. Meanwhile, Jasmine, Gino's former partner, began to sense shifts in the world around her. She had not anticipated that life would move this fast after their breakup. She had assumed the quiet months were for healing, for rebuilding herself. But rumors, the faint echoes of Gino's new life, began to appear online. Friends reached out, subtle questions were asked, and the faintest whispers suggested that Gino was no longer the man she had left. At first, she dismissed it. She had convinced herself that she had moved forward, that she was focused on her own life. But reality has a way of sneaking up, and soon enough, she could no longer ignore the truth. Gino and Natalie's next step was to secure their privacy. They rented a discreet apartment away from the press, away from familiar faces who might unintentionally leak information. They kept communication about the pregnancy minimal in public spaces, choosing instead to focus on routines, appointments, and plans. Every doctor's visit, every small milestone, was a shared secret. It was an oasis, a place where they could be unobserved, unjudged, and unhurried. In these private moments, Gino began to reflect on the past. He thought about Jasmine, about the heartbreak, about the moments when love had felt impossible. But he also realized that every heartbreak had prepared him for this. The patience he had learned, the need for communication, the necessity of calm, all of it had shaped him into a partner capable of building something lasting with Natalie. It wasn't perfection he sought. It was presence, stability, and understanding. Natalie also reflected, but her thoughts often returned to the future. A child was not just a responsibility. It was a shared project of love, patience, and growth. She thought about the values she wanted to teach, the example she wanted to set, and the life she wanted to create for this child. She also thought about Gino, the man who had entered her life quietly but profoundly, and she knew the road ahead would demand trust, resilience, and unity. Weeks turned into months. As the pregnancy progressed, Gino and Natalie began preparing for the inevitable public revelation. They decided to control the narrative themselves. They drafted announcements, discussed social media strategy, and planned a way to share the news that reflected the truth of their experience, the quiet beginning, the private love, and the responsible planning that led to this moment. They understood that speculation would never cease, but presenting their story themselves gave them the power to set the tone. Even as they prepared for public scrutiny, their private world remained remarkably intact. There were small, ordinary moments, mornings with coffee, evenings walking through parks, conversations about parenting, and gentle laughter over shared jokes. These moments reinforced the foundation of their relationship. For both Gino and Natalie, these were more meaningful than any public acknowledgement, more powerful than headlines, and more enduring than social media validation. The first public acknowledgement of the pregnancy was carefully orchestrated. They shared a photo, minimal words, just enough to confirm without over-explaining. The response was immediate. Social media erupted. Comments, messages, and media attention poured in. Fans compared past relationships, speculated about motives, and debated timelines. But Gino and Natalie had anticipated this. They responded minimally, focused on the truth, and refused to let speculation disrupt their private lives. Despite the attention, the pregnancy continued in relative calm. Appointments, scans, and milestones were observed with quiet joy. Gino and Natalie celebrated privately, relishing each movement, each heartbeat, each sign of life growing between them. The news of their child, though public, became a source of connection and grounding rather than stress. It reminded them why they had chosen each other, why they had created boundaries, and why they had committed to a life of mutual respect and care. As the months passed, both Gino and Natalie began to imagine the future with increasing clarity. Nursery plans were made, names debated, and routines considered. They spoke openly about parenting philosophies, shared responsibilities, and the kind of partnership they wanted to model for their child. Each conversation reinforced their commitment not just to the pregnancy, but to each other and the life they were building together. At the same time, Jasmine continued to navigate her own path. Though she was affected by the news, she focused on herself, on her healing, and on reclaiming her identity.